who's behind the simulation.
You could have aliens.
There is no reason to believe that aliens do not already exist. And that means, since they're not here now that we know of, they are likely very far ahead of us technologically. They are possibly some form of artificial intelligence already. We would then have this possibility that that is what is behind this kind of simulation. If we are in a situation where we are being observed, controlled, or created in a simulation, don't think that you're going to figure it out and pull a Neo.
You may pull a Neo locally, but not intergalactically, meaning that what Robin Hanson says is that they're sitting on the edge of our solar system, making sure that we don't get too technologically advanced, because if we exit the solar system, it could have a larger repercussion on the galaxy at large.
Zoo hypothesis.
The zoo hypothesis.
We're being, kept to a certain point. And I think that's certainly one possibility when it comes to aliens or even UFOs. But I think our understanding of that subject is also limited by our current view of the world. So if you look at the UFO experience, and I spent a lot of time, I spent time with Avi Loeb. I'm an advisor to the Galileo Project, and Gary Nolan at Stanford, the Soul Foundation, and spent time talking to Jacques Vallée, who's been researching UFOs since the 1960s. He was part of Project Blue Book. If you think about it, people who claim to have been contacted by these entities in the 50s, they said, where are they from? They said, we're from Venus. Now, we know that's probably unlikely, right? But did they just lie in order to have something that would fit their mental model? Because in the 50s, aliens were from Mars or Venus. Like that was something we could understand. Our science was good enough to understand it. We didn't know, perhaps at that time, there's no life. Or maybe we didn't by the 50s, but in general, it wasn't well known that there's no life.
Well, those were the close planets.
Yes,
we all know the order.
Right. But what I'm saying is now we know there are planets on other solar systems. And so we can interpret these phenomena as potentially being alien. But there are other interpretations of the phenomena that, so the reason I brought up Jacques Vallée's work was because he says, look, there have been stories of connections, encounters with non-human beings for thousands of years across different traditions. In the Celtic traditions, you have the Fae, who were take people into the Fae world. There's some in France that are a different set. And then in the Middle East, particularly in the Islamic countries, the Arab countries, you have the jinn and their stories. And I remember looking at some of the stories of these jinn that have been recounted from medieval times, and then looking at the stories that people tell in modern abduction. And I said, some of these are eerily similar. And so the question is it possible that they're seeing some entities from outside the simulation that are projecting in, but they're being presented in a way, just like a couple thousand years ago, someone might have seen an angel with wings or interpreted that to be an angel, or like the Fatima sightings in Portugal, they just saw a woman and they interpreted her as Mary. She never said she was Mary in that particular case. So is there an element of interpretation that our current science and our science fiction actually limits our ability?
Well, no, and I'm sure I'm sure you're familiar with the very common retort to that, which would be, perhaps the human brain will generate similar concepts because we have not evolved that much over the last, 10,000 years or so, right?
Right.
Meaning
right.
Like the brain that we have is the brain that existed in medieval times. It's the brain that existed in the time of Jesus and Muhammad and all these things. And so, we're all, tasked with this impossible notion of why am I here? What's it all for? Where did it come from? What are we doing here? And so there's not an infinite number of possibilities, right? So that the human brain, no matter what time in history you find us, will conjure something that can help explain it, right?
Right. Or it could be that we encounter phenomena we don't understand, and the human brain
Sure.
puts a mask on
Yes,
it,
right.
tries to interpret it.
Right, like no one is like, I mean, except Terrence McKenna when he smoked DMT, no one will say like mechanistic elves must be behind, why I'm dreaming.
Right.
Like nobody says that.
Right.
But it's, I mean, and I say that slightly tongue in cheek, but the notion is for people who delve into the world of psychedelics and even the world, when we talk about yoga nidra and we talk about, these kind of altered states that one can place themselves in, I think our strongest evidence does come from psilocybin, from LSD, from ketamine, like from these kind of like, oh my God, mushroom, like what's happening? So, to me, that's interesting because it's also, people use it recreationally, but some of these like psychotherapy assisted journeys, right, that involve internal family systems work and that involve that kind of traveling to other states of consciousness, where in many cases you're experiencing a sort of life review, right? You're experiencing, or even in EMDR. I mean, we've had people say, I had one experience, not through EMDR, but in a sort of therapeutic trance kind of state, where it's not that I was looking at my childhood bedroom. I was in my childhood bedroom. The eyes that were looking around the room were as if I was in a body that was small and that was looking around the room, right? So being able to kind of move into different timelines, right, is something that we know we can do. Is it an artifact or is it, part of this training? I don't know.
And I think it's, an ongoing debate. For example, like when the Native Americans saw like these big boats coming, they just couldn't interpret it. They didn't know it was a boat. They just said they're like cities made of wood. Like at first they didn't even perceive them. And when they perceived them, they weren't sure what they were looking at. That doesn't mean that there wasn't actually something in the ocean. It just means that their preconditions were such that they only interpret it. And it's possible that a lot of our interpretations are in this way and that the UFO phenomenon, the alien phenomenon is very complex. That said, in a multiplayer simulation, getting back to your earlier question about as a civilization, remember I said there you could view this question about the purpose of the simulation at a personal level, which is the video game, but at the bigger level, why do we run simulations? We run simulations of neurons, we run simulations of the virus spreading, of the weather, of the stock market, of landing on a comet, all of these types of things. And why do we do that? We do that to see what will happen and to see what's the most likely outcome. But we never run just one simulation. We always go back and we modify the variables and we run multiple simulations. Why? Again, we want to see what's the most likely outcome. And in some cases, we want to say what's the most favorable outcome. So how can we steer this? Which variables would we have to change
favorable doesn't
today?
necessarily mean positive, happy, and good.
Not necessarily, whatever the purpose of the simulation.
And that's why people who are, of a religious ilk would say, only God knows, right? Only God knows what's intended for you, right?
True, yes. People ask me, what's outside the simulation?
Aliens.
Aliens. It could be future humans. I mean, the term simulation hypothesis came from a guy named Nick Bostrom, who's a philosopher at Oxford. And, he called these ancestor simulations, which would be like us simulating ancient Rome or simulating Greece, right? So it would be future humans simulating, and that's what the Matrix was.
Remember when?
Yes.
Remember when there was water in the oceans? Let's go back and recreate that.
Remember when teenagers wouldn't get off their phones? Now the phone is their brain.
Exactly. But that also leaves open the possibility that if you were running that, you would run multiple timelines. You would run it again and again and again. You could end up with characters like Groundhog Day, for example, where they go again and again. You could try out every single possibility. And so back to the civilizational question of running a simulation, it could be very much to see where it ends up. Does it end up destroying itself? Do humans get off the planet? Maybe there's another civilization of aliens, and the whole purpose of the simulation is to see when we meet, how long does it take us to get to that point where we can meet, which is a whole interesting discussion in and of itself. So anyway, I think that there's a lot of interesting elements to this. But that's why I write about both the NPC version and the RPG version in the book. But I think you can look at it differently depending on your orientation, and it doesn't have to be, just like religion, mystical experiences don't have to be negative. They can be a positive in your life. Simulation theory can be a negative or a positive in your life if you view it that way.
I don't think they would unplug us because I think they want us to see and have the experience of knowing that we are part of something that is greater. You
I
don't
disagree.
think so?
I disagree.
Well, in the movie The 13th Floor, so I bring up science fiction a lot just because it's easier to talk about these possibilities. Just like with aliens, it's easier for people to imagine them. But it was actually based on a book which came out all the way back in like 1964, I think, called Simulacron 3 by Daniel Galluye. And they modified it a bit in the film. But in the book, it was actually a simulation run by marketing ad executives. And when he figured out that he was in a simulation, that's when they wanted to shut the experiment down. Because their experiment was, how will people react to marketing new products? It was a very 1950s Mad Men type of world. But I don't necessarily think that's the reason for the simulation, because there are people who, like Plato's philosopher, have peeked outside the simulation and realize it, and they haven't shut us down yet. And I mean, all our religious texts have been saying this for thousands of years. So perhaps that, in my opinion, that's not the most likely scenario, but it could be if we were in an NPC simulation. That certainly could happen.
Yeah, the only reason that I disagree is I think that if we're at the level of potentially contemplating that we're in a simulation that is governed by some sort of, like, any human attempt we have to understand what the purpose, meaning, or end game is going to fall so short of what actually is happening. Like, it's like saying I'm going to use Tinker Toys to build a jet.
Well, I do agree with that to a certain extent, because whatever computer systems would be running this simulation would have to be so advanced.
Correct.
Like, well beyond even what we think of as quantum computers.
No, we can't.
We're not even there. Yeah,
correct.
we're not even there
You can't
yet.
imagine it.
But that's
But
why
I appreciate you don't think that they would unplug us.
I don't think so. I think that I don't think these are glitches. I think they're actually clues. And I think,
which is a term I like, by the way. I like that term, clues.
they're clues that there's a larger expansion of consciousness that has been shared through all the mystic texts. Why are all these mystics having this awareness of non-physical reality and communicating it? It's so that there can be a larger understanding. Physics is now pulling us and trying to bring the materialist view forward to help merge these things. That doesn't seem like it's an unplugged situation. It's like, let's take this information, build bridges across all these disciplines, build a larger understanding of why we're here, both collectively and individually. And I think better things will happen, and potentially, I'll say the experiment may ultimately succeed in that we don't all destroy each other.
Let's hope that's the case, right? Or if we do destroy each other, it's possible that you can rerun the simulation.
It's Mayim Bialik's breakdown. She's gonna break it down for you. She's got a neuroscience PhD or two. One fiction, one and now she's gonna break down. It's a breakdown. She's gonna break it down.